we are unpacking the ultimate clash of paradigms, modernism versus postmodernism. Can we ever really truly know anything for sure about world politics? That single question sits right at the heart of what we're exploring today. It's a massive divide. On one side, you've got the pursuit of scientific certainty, the idea that the world is this giant mechanism we can measure. On the other, the rather provocative idea that knowledge itself is tangled up with power, and that what we call truth is actually deeply constructed. So, here is our agenda. First, IR's third great debate. Second, modernism, science and structure. Third, postmodernism, deconstructing reality. Fourth, clashing paradigms and concepts. And finally, why this debate matters. Starting with Section 1, IR's third great debate. To really grasp these theories, we have to zoom out and look at the history of the discipline itself. For decades, the dominant positivist scientific approach basically ran the show. But then, hit the 1980s, and the third debate arrives. A massive post-positivist wave crashed onto the scene, acting as this radical challenger to the entire status quo. Moving to Section 2, modernism, science, and structure. Think of this lens like a high-powered scientific microscope, trying to bring the mechanics of the world into sharp, objective focus. The absolute bedrock for modernists is foundationalism. This is the firm belief that, hey, there is a stable, objective reality out there just waiting to be discovered. It implies that the mechanics of international politics exist entirely independently of whoever happens to be looking at them. Modernism builds its whole worldview on that foundation. It uses a positivist epistemology modeled straight on the natural sciences. The state? It's treated as a rational, unitary actor, just pursuing power. And because modernists believe in objective reality, they seek these massive, grand theories like realism or liberalism, focusing heavily on system-level structures like global anarchy. The logic here is incredibly linear. You start with the assumption of objective knowledge, which leads straight to viewing the state as the central actor. That drives the creation of grand theories, which ultimately leads researchers to formulate clean, testable hypotheses. It's a highly scientific way to try and decode global affairs. Which brings us to Section 3, postmodernism, deconstructing reality. If modernism is a microscope, postmodernism acts way more like a critical prism, aggressively questioning absolutely everything modernism takes for granted. Postmodernism is anchored entirely in anti-foundationalism. It flatly rejects the idea that we can ever have neutral or value-free knowledge about the world. For a postmodernist, the observer is always biased, and the facts are always shaped by the society, language, and power structures that produce them in the first place. To deconstruct reality, they rely on a very specific intellectual toolkit. They draw heavily on Michel Foucault's power/knowledge nexus, arguing that knowledge is never neutral. It's produced by those in power to maintain that power. They use Jacques Derrida's method to literally deconstruct binary language, kind of like taking apart a Lego set to see how concepts like us versus them were built. Plus, following Jean-François Lyotard, they hold a profound skepticism toward any overarching grand theories. Under this alternative logic, anti-foundationalism turns everything completely upside down. Concepts we usually treat as hard objective facts, like national borders, sovereignty, or state identities, are suddenly viewed as constructs. They aren't permanent realities at all. They are simply narratives we've agreed upon through language. Section 4, clashing paradigms and concepts. Now that we've set up the frameworks, let's put them into a direct, point-by-point intellectual clash. First up is epistemology, how we actually know what we know. Modernism, as we covered, wants objective, discoverable truth that sits totally outside of human perception. Postmodernism vehemently counters this, arguing that truth isn't discovered, it's completely discursive and constructed by the societies we live in. Historically, they both had their eras of primary influence. Modernism was the undisputed heavyweight during the mid-20th century, really guiding the early decades of the Cold War. But postmodernism firmly stepped into the ring in the 1980s as a direct intellectual challenge to that established norm. When it comes to what they actually study, the divide is stark. Modernists look out at the material world. They measure military power, economic strength, the structural anarchy of the system. Postmodernists focus intensely inward, on language, narratives, and that intricate power-knowledge nexus that defines how we even talk about the world to begin with. And that brings us to the key theorists championing these ideas. You have highly influential, traditional heavyweights like Hans Morgenthau and Kenneth Waltz in the Modernist corner. Facing them are the critical, disruptive voices of Richard Ashley, James Derderian, and R.B.J. Walker in the postmodernist corner. Finally, Section 5, why this debate matters. Because why does some abstract academic debate from the 1980s actually matter for understanding real-world politics today? Well, in practice, both lenses have incredibly different impacts. Modernism gives us great, testable models for policy, but it risks blindly treating the Western state system as universal for everyone. On the flip side, postmodernism neutrally opens up vital space for marginalized non-Western perspectives, exposing how supposedly neutral concepts might be hiding political interests. However, it definitely gets criticized for being overly abstract, making it notoriously hard to form actionable foreign policy. But hey, rather than one side totally vanquishing the other, this intense debate enriched the whole discipline. It sparked bridging theories like constructivism, which tries to blend the importance of ideas with empirical rigor. Ultimately, this clash forced a push for reflexivity, demanding all scholars genuinely question their own biases, and created a much more pluralistic,